All right, fellas, it's ADV Yam time again, and we're going to talk through the differences between my new Aprilia Tuareg 660 and my old desert sled. We're on a quick little dirt loop here, just going to have some fun and talk you through the differences. Because both bikes are similar in their execution, but obviously the Tuareg does differ in quite a big way. So I kind of like modified my desert sled. Let's get a little slide action here, huh? Woo! So I kind of modified my desert sled to be a bit of a all-rounder ADV style touring bike. I used to ride it more off-road before I got lighter weight dirt bikes and stuff. And I got this Aprilia Tuareg 660 a few weeks ago, and I've been really enjoying it. Oh yeah. You know, having proper weight distribution is the biggest thing I noticed between this bike and something like the Scrambler. The weight is really low down on this thing. It makes it really nice. The center of gravity is really nice and low. And with that 21-inch front end, it's really easy to float over rocks like this. You guys see these kind of larger baby head style rocks. The suspension is a little more forgiving. A little bit taller. It's not that much taller. The ground clearance, I think, on this thing is a little over 10 inches, whereas on the sled it's like 9.5. But all those little differences really add up, you know. The Scrambler, it's a bike that you can take off-road. You kind of shouldn't. It's not that capable of doing it. I did a lot of crazy stuff with that bike. I rode it down to Mexico. I did trails in California and New Mexico with it. I did stuff with that bike that you probably shouldn't do. But the Tuareg is a very willing companion for off-road shenanigans. Let's sit down and get a little slide. And despite the fact that it has a motor that's about 150 cc's less than the desert sled, I still find this engine to be very playful, very willing, and very zesty. Well, here, you guys see that? It just wicks it up super nice. And that's the other big difference. It's much more modern. You know, the sled has a fantastic kind of grumbly, air-cooled, old-school quality to it. And I really love that. I really dig the 2-valve Desmo motor, air-cooled. It's just a real treat. Woo! Dab it a little, baby. A little bit of sand back there. Whereas the Tuareg is eminently modern. It's a very modern motorcycle. It was designed to be very modern. And it feels it. It just feels more sophisticated in the way that it does pretty much everything. And that's super fun. You know, it's such a treat to ride a bike that's very modern, very sophisticated. You don't have to make compromises or excuses for it as much as you would with the old desert sled. Now, some of you might not know, but I'm not a complete noob when it comes to off-road riding. I've done some adventure riding. Done a couple adventure press launches. I've owned a WR250R, a Husky FE501. Rode both of those bikes on some trails. I did some motocross for a little bit. But the kind of 400 plus pound adventure bike thing is a little new to me. But this bike does flatter you quite a bit. It definitely flatters you. And it's really fun to whip around. Let's see if we can just back it in a little bit here. Yeah. Likes to slip and slide, baby. But yeah, it's very confidence inspiring. Very nice off-road. But this is about the limit of what I'd want to do with it. You know, kind of forest road, dirt road type of stuff. I've seen people do really crazy stuff with their Tuareg 660s and their Tenere 700s. But truthfully for me, I really don't have anything to prove to anyone. And this bike will live primarily on road. So why don't we go ahead and jump on road with it, and I'll talk you through the differences of this machine on road versus the desert sled as well. Let's go ahead and do that. So given that this motorcycle is much more sophisticated, much more advanced, than the Desert Sled. On road, you feel that too. I put a bunch of things on my motorcycle on road on the Desert Sled to make it more like something like this, but it's really cool how this bike just has all of it right out of the box. So the first thing is a USB charge port right there at the front, ready to go. I had to wire that one up on the Desert Sled. Electronically controlled cruise control. Big difference over the throttle lock on the sled. The throttle lock gets you there, you know, like you're able to get your right wrist a little bit of brake, but having the ability to toggle this on, go ahead and flick it on, and it will set that speed no matter what, uphill, downhill. That's really nice. With a throttle lock, it's going to just go the speed that the throttle is dictating. It's a much more rudimentary system, but it still works, you know? It still definitely works. Tubeless as well. That was something I had to do on the Desert Sled that was awful. It took forever to get those wheels off and to tape up the holes and to seal them, redo it. It took probably like 3 or 4 different tries to make sure it didn't leak any air. And I actually had this tire pressure monitoring system on the sled that I now put on here just to give me a little bit of peace of mind, because I never knew if it was going to actually hold air or not. The wind protection as well. You know what's funny is I'm so used to riding the Desert Sled that riding a motorcycle like this with such a tall, pronounced windshield is kind of weird for me. I think I'm actually going to go for a lower windshield on this motorcycle so that I can get a little bit more airflow. And if I want to go do a gigantic tour with it, I might slap back on this windshield, but maybe a modular option could work as well. Something that's a little bit lower, because when I get my head up here, I love the airflow I get to my face and through my visor and stuff. If I go here, I don't quite get the correct amount of airflow. And that's something that's really tough with windshields. It's such a personal choice type of thing. And I've barely ever seen it where a stock windshield works perfectly for a given rider. It's pretty rare because we all have different torso sizes, different preferences, and so they just had to put a windshield on that was going to work. These kind of like hand guards, they're not really hand guards. These are kind of like soft plasticky things. You guys can see I can kind of bend these. Definitely going to swap these for a more robust bark buster system. That's something that is, you know, not so great on this motorcycle that I do prefer on my Desert Sled. The biggest difference on this motorcycle over the sled is the braking components. Now, on the Desert Sled, I fitted an RCS 15 Brembo master cylinder with a direct line to the caliper. It's got a single disc with a radial mounted Brembo up front. The Desert Sled's braking system actually works phenomenally well now. When it was stock, it had this really sloppy, squishy brake lever feel, and I always hated it. And ABS lines obviously didn't help because the fluid is traveling about 3 times as long as it needs to over just a direct. And obviously you lose ABS, right? It's a slightly reduction. It's a slight reduction in the safety systems of the motorcycle, but for me the trade-off is impeccable braking feel, such that I never feel the need to, you know, over brake or under brake. You just have perfect progressive modularity over the brakes, and I love that. And so that's something I definitely want to do on this motorcycle as well. Is I'm probably going to swap with the master. I'm probably going to start with the master cylinder swap, see how that feels, and then we're going to go for hopefully direct lines if it's not good enough, because then you really get it dialed in. But direct lines is a bit more of an involved process than just swapping out the master cylinder.
This is a Kawasaki Ninja 500 SE, and it could be yours if you become a member over on yammynoob.co. I give away motorcycles all the time. I've given away over 53 bikes at this point, valued at well over $500,000. We've done top-of-the-line bikes, beginner bikes, crazy scramblers, all kinds of things in between, and this new Ninja 500 SE is the new bike we have to give away. Become a member over at yammynoob.co and rack up your chances to win this motorcycle. It could end up in your driveway.
The size of this machine, it's quite a bit bigger than the Desert Sled. Even though the Desert Sled is a pretty substantial bike, Tuareg is even more substantial, and that took a little getting used to. It's a very large, very commanding machine, and you know, that takes a little bit of getting used to if you're used to riding kind of naked sport bikes and scramblers and smaller bikes like that. The bars are about as wide, so it's really not that different from the seat, but you know, the shape of the gas tank, the extra fairings, the height of it, it is a more substantial bike than the Desert Sled. This bike, it did not come equipped with the the quick shifter, and that's something I really want to get on this bike. I feel like it really just fits the nature of this liquid cooled parallel twin. to just snick up through the gears with a quick shifter. That's like proper Aprilia sporty kind of DNA. You know, stock for stock, I don't know which bike is faster necessarily. They make very similar horsepower figures. I bet you the Desert Sled probably hits harder off of a red light. And so I think that, you know, if you launch off a red light, the Desert Sled would probably beat it a little bit. But I think the Tuareg definitely has more top end, more ponies up there. But I don't really think this thing tops out very fast. I think it goes maybe like 115, 120 if you're really cooking it. The gearing is great though. It's similar to the Sled where you really get to use a lot of the gearbox. The gears aren't really too long. I really like it. You know, cruising at 7,000 or 70 miles an hour, a little over 5,000 RPM, feels really good, you know? It's a nice feeling. It doesn't feel like it's too high in the RPMs. If you really were going to do a long distance type of thing with this, you maybe could drop a tooth in the rear, get a little bit taller gearing, but I don't really care. I think it works just fine. The Sled does have more charm and character. You know, the air-cooled L-twin Desmo 2-valve Ducati engine is just full of charm and character. And the biggest question I got when I did my launch video for this, and when I kind of told people that I got this motorcycle, they kind of said, well, are you going to keep the Sled? And when I first rode this bike, I was like, damn it, this thing kind of does everything the Sled would do, but just better. You know, it's more refined, it has link, it has, you know, kind of everything is better, and it's just built from the factory to just go. And so I was like, shit, I might have to sell the Sled. But then I, you know, kind of thought about it after riding the Sled again, and I was like, man, the Desert Sled is really such a unique experience of this, like, kind of retro charmy naked bike meets adventure bike, and it, like, splits the difference for me between both styles of motorcycle perfectly. And I think that's why I've never found a bike that quite makes me feel like the Desert Sled, because there's really nothing like it. You know, there's plenty of like sport naked bikes that have kind of a rumbly character. Think of like an SV650, right? Older Ducatis too, the Monster. Those bikes all have that same quality. But to fit it into a bike that looks retro and cool and charming, and is a little taller and a little more rugged, really gives the bike an incredibly cool vibe that is super unique. The Tuareg is a great motorcycle, but it's certainly not unique. It feels pretty much like every other large adventure bike, you know? Feels like a Tenere 700, just with a little bit more pizzazz. Kind of feels like a, you know, any middleweight ADV bike kind of feels like this. I think this one is the most well executed of all the middleweight ADV bikes for sure. And it's super confidence inspiring. Like, we're about to just do this tiny little scrambly loop here, and I'm just gonna take it absolutely old man status and just sit through the whole thing, because the Tuareg really provides you so much confidence off-road, and like in kind of rough conditions, you really don't feel like the chassis is getting upset at all with anything. It's really, really nice. A little bit of gravel here. You can still lose traction, obviously, and it's a big street bike. You don't want to go down and lose some traction, but it's kind of cool because it'll take it. One of the similarities I think that's kind of funny is this colorway is very similar to my other bike too. Like the white, the red. This one obviously has a little bit of blue in it because the Desert Sled doesn't have that blue. But the red frame, the Italian kind of vibe, yeah, it's definitely got a similar energy going on to it, you know? Yeah, check this out. This bike just soaks it all up. It literally doesn't even care. You can ride this total Wilbur mode, total old man GS mode. You only got to stand up very occasionally. These kind of like gravelly fire roads are really what these bikes are awesome at. They're super good at this kind of stuff because you can go and explore, and if you're not going down anything too gnarly, you're just gonna have an awesome time. So I think the biggest thing about these bikes, and much like I did with my Scrambler, is you just gotta plan ahead. You gotta really scout out the route and make sure you're going through something that you feel very confident going through. Like for my skill set, I would never take this down like a single track or even a really gnarly twin track that you know, has like crazy big bumps or crazy elevation changes. That would not be a wise idea for my skill set. But a lighter weight bike, I surely would do that. But this sort of thing, you know, trundling down a little bit of gravel road here. This is great. Really just soaks it all up. And that was something that the sled really couldn't do. I had thought about swapping in like way better suspension on the Desert Sled. All right, check this out. We got to stand up for this section here. I thought about swapping in like, you know, proper suspension on the Desert Sled and all that, but I was like, ultimately, for what I was doing with the machine, it just wasn't really worth it, you know? But this bike stock is just great what it can do. Alley-oop. There we go. And the one quality this bike has that the sled has as well is how playful it is. It's a very playful bike, and I love that. One of the biggest things I look for in my personal motorcycles is how playful the machine is. I really don't want a bike that is cumbersome and lackluster and just isn't willing to have a nice time, you know? The way that they designed this is so much fun. It just picks it up off a corner beautifully. It's got a pretty sporty engine when you want it, honestly. It zings up pretty damn good. And it's a ton of fun. I think when you compare Tuareg versus sled or Scrambler style motorcycle, this thing is just, it's more refined, it's more modern, it's more complete, right? Like it's just a more complete motorcycle than the Ducati. I think that the Scrambler can be made like I have to do certain things, and it's great, but there's a big difference when you just buy something from the factory that is just set up for that sort of thing. And you don't have to think too much about it, you know? Like, all you'd really need to do for this, if you wanted to tweak it one way or the other, you know, more aggressive tires, and maybe if you really wanted to get the super full Zoot suspension on this and go crazy off-road or whatever, yeah, you could probably do that, but for average adventure style riding, a stock Tuareg is completely fine. Like, you really don't need much. And that's really cool. So guys, those are some of the differences between the Tuareg and the Desert Sled. Hopefully this video helped show you why I'm keeping the sled and how the Tuareg is different from the Desert Sled. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Let's see, maybe a little first gear wheelie. Yeah, it'll do it. It'll do second gear too if you got enough room, but I'm a little twisty here. All right, boys. Thanks for watching today's video. It's just a fun little laid-back vlog with your Papa Yam. I'll catch you in the next one. See you later.
Keep watching Yammy Nerd.